Okay, so we've been talking about how to create really compelling communications content in organizations that are distributed and organizations that are operating in a fast-paced, complex information environment, which we're all living in right now. And in a previous video, we talked about the fact that if you take a 5-step process to the development of compelling content, where you talk about objectives and then audiences and connection, and then and only then move to how you orchestrate a campaign and reach and rhythm to get that message out and measure the effect, then you're going to get the most compelling content into your audiences that you can. And so what I want to talk about in this video is really how you go about that first critical stage of setting those objectives so that you're really doing it with the audience focused in mind. And the first thing I want to talk about in that is the fact that in McChrystal Group's model, the model that we say is a parent of 21st century leadership, is the fact that leadership actually now sits at the intersection of leaders and followers and context. And that's a fundamental change from what we used to call 20th century leadership, where leaders made objectives, those objectives became strategies, and those strategies became outcomes upon which leaders were judged themselves. So this intersection is an absolute, really important characteristic of the modern information environment. And actually there's a real parallel between the leadership model and the new communications model, because if you take out leaders and rewrite communicators up here, and you replace followers with audiences, you have exactly the same analogy of the modern information environment, the modern communications environment, as we do of the leadership. And great communication, just as great leadership, now sits at the heart of communicators, audiences, and context. And audiences have never had a more compelling vote in the information, the belief game, as they do now. Just think of what goes on social media. So we've always used a really clear methodology for setting SMART goals in the past. We've made sure that our goals that we set, or our objectives that we set, are absolutely specific to what we want to achieve. We've made sure that they are measurable, in metrics that we use to calculate in corporate success or organizational success. We make sure they are achievable within the resources of the organization. We make sure they are realistic, and that's a subjective judgment that most leaders, great leaders, used to take. And of course, we make sure they are time bound. So we want to achieve X amount of profit by time Y. That is the traditional SMART goal setting model, or at least it was, because this happened in the era of great leaders, which I previously referred to, where the people who were making the strategies were the people who were crafting the communications around that. So this is a great way to set objectives if you are the broadcaster and you're not considering so much the impact on the audience. And as I've already explained to you, that doesn't actually work in the 21st century, because what you need to consider now more than anything before is how much that message is going to resonate in the audiences who are listening to it. So we're talking about setting audience-focused objectives. And so we have a new way of thinking about SMART goal setting for that environment. We say that your objectives must, first of all, be simple. Really simple, and simple doesn't mean easy. It means you condense the message that you want to get down to your audience to the shortest possible amount of content that will create an emotional reaction. And it's much harder to do. If you think of Nike, just do it. Red Bull gives you wings. Those are the kind of things that you really, really have to get a really simple message that will enter your brain quicker and stay there longer. The second thing you need to do is you need to make your objectives meaningful to the audience. And when I say meaningful in the audience, there is no sense in dressing up your objectives in jargon, in management speak, or in metrics that people don't understand if the audience that you want to communicate doesn't know what those metrics are. So make it really meaningful. Thirdly, you have to make it appropriate to the cultural norms within that audience. And I think that's more important now than ever before. You have to take a cultural look at your organization, find out which audiences are going to react well or not so well to key messages, and really think about how you set the objective around that. Finally, when we talk about an objective being reasonable, I'm talking about that objective being reasonable within the aspirations of that audience. So the individuals you're trying to communicate to can make a conscious decision about whether or not this is somewhere they feel they are capable to go with the organization, or are you setting something that's just too far ahead for them to cope with? So reasonable within the expectations of the audience. And then finally, trackable. trackable by the audience. There is no point in you measuring success in your terms if the audience, which now has more means to measure success, and opinion, and likes, and popularity than ever it has before, if they can't track it. So the key here is to craft an objective that will be trackable by the audience. You immediately get the buy-in from the audience that is forming the objective, or from people who know the informed opinion of the audience, so that they can be involved as well. As with all of this process, this is about making sure that the communications that you set up, and particularly the content of the communications that you set up, is about making sure you're communicating what the audience needs to hear rather than just what you want to say.